Hi, welcome back to my channel. This week we're going to move through the various Enneagram types again. This week we're working on type 8, which is the challenger. And as the name would suggest, they like a challenge. They like to challenge themselves and to challenge others. This type is one of those types, I believe type 2, the helpers, falls in this category too, that they're just very easy to turn into fictional characters. Mainly because challengers, especially, are very action oriented, and action does things. Characters who drive the plot on their own make for good, interesting characters. Also, Type 8s make really good villains, as we see. So you'll probably be used to seeing a lot of Type 8s in films and fiction and that sort of stuff. They are natural born leaders. They're very charismatic, very persuasive. They can be very much individualistic. They don't let the opinions of other people sway them very much. They don't like being controlled or manipulated or held down. They want to do their own thing in their own way, and they want to tell you about it too. So they're not that interested in listening to the opinions of others. They can withstand a great deal of physical pain and discomfort and punishment. That makes them very natural athletes. A lot of athletic types are type 8s. That's why also a lot of professional athletes, when they stop being professional athletes, find it very easy to move into like motivational speaking and those sort of areas because they're used to being in leadership roles and that sort of thing. Um, they can become very confused by the emotions of others. They're not necessarily that in touch with their own emotions, and so the emotions of other people can kind of confuse them. They don't necessarily get why people are acting the way they are, and sometimes their fear is that they're being manipulated. People are trying to use emotions to manipulate them, which makes them afraid of being held down, and so they kind of resist that. Um, they usually show their love for other people by doing things. Actions don't mean very much to them. They're usually a doer. You know when a type 8 likes you is because they want to do stuff for you. Want to make things happen. Uh, they don't want to admit their vulnerabilities to themselves or other people. That means type 8s a lot of times don't come to counseling. And if they do, it's because someone else has forced them. A lot of times, my type 8s, um, they're like half of a couple. One person, usually the woman, wants to come in for counseling, and she drags along her husband who doesn't really want to admit that there's any problems or anything. So these can kind of be your very stoic types. It's not that they don't have emotions; it's just that they don't really want to express them too much, especially like negative emotions like fear and sadness, because they see that as being vulnerable. They also will reject other people before they get rejected. And sometimes they'll reject people just because they think it's coming. They don't necessarily know that they're going to be rejected by someone. So they'll reject them instead. They'll be the ones who will just out of the blue just say this isn't going to work anymore. We can't hang out anymore. Mainly because they feel like they're afraid that you're going to hurt them, so they want to hurt you first. Although it sounds a little rougher than I think a lot of them mean it as well. Um, their basic fear is being harmed or controlled by others. They don't like being pinned down. Of course, that means their basic desire is to protect themselves and to be free. They value their freedom, maybe more so than any other group, except maybe Type 4s, which are the individualists. Um, but Type 4s, their freedom is more internal within. They want to be able to express and discover themselves as they can. They don't really care about what the rest of the world does around them. Whereas Type 8s are the type who hate being tied down. They can make great bosses or very difficult bosses, but they can also be very difficult employees because they will not just follow the rules because you told them to. They're not interested in just going along to get along. They'll want to push it. They're the challengers. They challenge things, including their boss. From my experience when looking at Type 8s and substance abuse. What I usually see them, they kind of vacillate between the two, and they might actually abuse both of these. Is one, a lot of times they want to use alcohol to calm down. Um, they tend to drink to calm down because they have this sort of very fiery energy. If you want to use like elemental personality types, eights are definitely fire, a type of fire. Um, and so they need alcohol to kind of calm down, to bring them down, to not feel the urge to constantly push against things. But the flip side is a lot of times they'll use stimulants, cocaine, meth, even just lots of caffeine. Um, so that way they can constantly feel up and keep going because they've got this internal energy and they want a body that will keep up with it as well. Um, I guess another one, this is sort of tangentially, is just because type 8s can be very athletic. Athletes get injured. Injuries cause pain. So I can see some type 8s being addicted to painkillers as well. But kind of different for different reasons than other folks. And so it's not quite the same. Um, I think that's more like a special situation. But like I said, mostly I would see type 8s using or abusing alcohol and stimulants. Let's see. So when we work through the various healthy stages, working from the extremely unhealthy down to healthy, or all the way down to the healthy levels. Um, Type 8s at their extreme levels, they can be murderous. They can be violent. They can kill you because again, very fiery, very action oriented, very movement. They can be kind of paranoid, very socially isolated because they don't trust people. They're afraid that they're going to get hurt or controlled or manipulated, and so they don't want to be around anybody. They don't trust anybody. They can kind of end up lacking a lot of empathy. They don't really understand the emotions of others, and that's just a step away from just not caring about the emotions of others. Type 8s are more likely to be criminals, follow more in criminal activity, antisocial activity. Antisocial being that they just don't care about the rules of society. They don't care about laws. They don't really believe any of that stuff really applies to them. I remember I used to work in a halfway house, and this was for guys who had gotten out of prison who were on parole. Um, and I worked with all sorts of convicts except for sex offenders because that halfway house didn't house sex offenders. Um, and it was interesting the sort of thieves, the identity theft, credit card abuse, writing hot checks, just regular old thieves and robbers and stuff like that. Now, a lot of them were extremely manipulative, very controlling, resisted the rules, always were looking for that angle to kind of break the rules. And they'd even say things like, like for instance, if they broke into your car, if they were walking by your car and they saw your purse sitting in the front seat and they broke in your car and took your purse, they'd say it was your fault. You shouldn't have left their purse out where you could see it. That's kind of antisocial behavior. That the rule, the idea of like, oh, that's someone's purse, I shouldn't take that doesn't occur to them. To them, it's like, oh, I saw your purse, I wanted your purse, and why'd you leave it laying out for? You should have known someone like me was going to come along and steal it. So it's your fault that I stole your purse. That's kind of the antisocial behavior. So as you can see, type 8s make for easy villains. They are the criminal types. So a lot, and because they are driven to do things, they are the drivers of many plots, and so they make great villains for thrillers and mysteries and crime, all the sorts of crime fiction. Maybe even some horror, depending on what you're writing, like slasher type things, serial killer type things, because they will drive the plot. They have their own motivations. They're going to act on their motivations. They're going to do something. Someone once said that I think I was talking about like evil campaigns in Dungeons and Dragons, and a good character can be a good character by simply staying home. They don't have to do anything necessarily to be a good character. But evil characters, they have to do something to be evil. You have to go out and rob somebody, kill somebody, attack somebody, try and take over the world or something. Evil characters have a motivation and they act on it. Whereas good characters can just sit around because as long as everything is going okay, a good character doesn't have anything to do. They don't have anything to bother with. If there was no Lex Luthor, Superman would be kind of bored because he'd just be hanging out waiting for something. Be all Superman kind of easy. He'd always have an easy time opening up the pickle jar, but he doesn't have to fly around in a cape and uniform and stuff. It's not until Lex Luthor or some other villain comes along and does something. So when you're talking about heroes and villains, Type 8s fill that bill pretty good. But kind of moving from the extreme level of unhealthiness to just regular old healthiness, they can still be very destructive and violent. They're probably not quite to the point of being murderous, but they can be very combative and assaultive. And they, again, are afraid that someone will hurt them, and so they're likely to lash out first and want to attack first. These are the types who, I don't know, the boyfriend who's afraid that his girlfriend's cheating on him, so he goes out and cheats on somebody else first. Or he starts becoming very controlling and manipulative and wants her to keep her at home where he can see her because he's afraid she's going to go out and cheat on him and hurt him. So he, wants to control her so she can't do that. And unfortunately, it usually becomes like the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because who wants to be in a relationship with a guy like that? So the person breaks up with him or goes out and cheats on him, and therefore just starts the cycle all over again. It gives the Type 8 a reason to be paranoid at that point. But he created that reason to be paranoid. It's an interesting story angle there. They can even become to the point of having delusions of invulnerability, like nobody can really hurt them. Nothing really bad will happen. So that means they'll take risks, maybe a lot of unnecessary risks, the kinds that will actually get themselves hurt or killed or something. And they can also be kind of paranoid because they're always on the lookout for someone going to hurt them emotionally, physically, any of those areas. But when we move into the average level of Type 8s, one is they can be very businesslike and very competitive. So Type 8s can excel in the business world, especially even at the average level, because they're naturally competitive, kind of aggressive, wanting to challenge themselves, and that might be by measuring themselves against somebody else or by their old ones. Type 8s do great in sales because they can be very charismatic and very leading, but they're also very competitive. So they're always going for that bigger sale. They want to be at the top of the rank of the sales team. They want to outdo the other guy in on their team, that sort of stuff. But they can be very boastful, very willful, very proud. They're basically jerks as well at Type 8s. They can be afraid that others will not follow them, especially if they want to move into a leadership role of any type. They'll be afraid that people won't follow them. So they can be a little bit more kind of micromanaging because they want to make sure you're doing everything that they said to do in the way that they want you to do it because they don't really trust you to just go along. And they can also make promises that they can't keep and maybe even just threaten people. Like I said, when they move into a leadership role, they want to make sure people will follow them. And so what they'll do is they'll make huge boastful claims about how great they are and how things will be. And then if you call them out on it, then they threaten you and stuff like that. And so, like I said, they kind of jerks to work with in that sense. But when they're healthy, then things are great. They prove their strength through protecting others and bringing out the strengths of other people. So to them, their challenge now becomes making you better instead of just proving how great they are. And that's why they become really great leaders if they work at it. They can become very independent. They stop really caring quite as much about what other people might think in a much more sort of healthy way. Instead of shutting down their emotions, they just accept some people are not going to like them, and that's perfectly fine. They also stop being paranoid, and they stop seeing threats coming from all different angles. They sort of let go of the belief that they need to be in control of their lives, and that there are some things that they just can't control, that they sort of have to let let go of that notion. And so therefore they're not constantly afraid of someone else trying to come along and control them. They're the ones who can be a really great leader on the team, but then they can also turn around and be a really great follower because they don't see themselves in competition with their boss anymore. They just see themselves as a part of a hierarchy. The type 8 might have their eyes on moving up that hierarchy, but they're not really going to do it in as quite of a destructive way as like maybe the more unhealthy versions of type 8s. So getting to some examples of type 8s, what's interesting is when I was looking up some examples from like real world is just about any dictator or cult leader would fall into this category. They're all action oriented. They're all want to do things. They're all very charismatic, um, but they're usually paranoid. They don't trust people, and they usually can be very murderous. Mao Zedong killed, I think, 100 million people or 50 million people. It's a ridiculously high number. Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot. You go down the list. As far as cult leaders, it's the same thing. Jim Jones. Hell, I guess like Charles Manson might fit in this category. All very powerful, very charismatic people. There's something about them that draws people in. When you look at them, they're not necessarily like the best looking people ever, but they've got something else that's going on that draws people in and makes people want to follow them. Unfortunately, to sometimes bad ends. But also all your positive, more positive leaders, like Winston Churchill falls, it would be a type 8. What I thought interesting was in the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, they described Donald Trump. Well, this came out like in the 90s or something. Long before Donald Trump decided to run for president, they were listing him as a type 8. And if you look at him, yeah, he's a type 8. He's a little boastful. Maybe makes promises he can't always keep. But hard worker, definitely charismatic, whether you like him or not. He has a huge following, has for decades. People have wanted to be like Trump since the 80s. And so, very, very good example of a type 8. Whether you think he's a hero or a villain, that's up to you. But getting to more fictional examples, again, would be like President Snow from the Hunger Games. Definitely a type 8, a leader, a very powerful leader, charismatic in his own ways, not a really nice guy. So, he made a good villain for the Hunger Games. Another leader that they had, or another fictional character, is Magneto from the Marvel superhero from the Marvel comics. He's the mutant who had the ability to manipulate metal, because that's why he's Magneto. He was the one who was a Jewish kid during the Holocaust, and he survived, and now he was like leading the mutants, to be like, originally he was like wanting mutants to be like the superior race. He was sort of like a mutant Adolf Hitler within the Marvel Comics world, and then they just made him a lot more, gave him a lot more depth to him as well, so he became a lot more of a interesting character. He wasn't necessarily just the evil mutant who wants to rule the world. He was now this guy who had seen how bad humans could get, and his was like, I'll go after the humans before they go after me. Again, very type 8 sort of view. And then another good type 8 is like a lot of action type heroes. Conan the Barbarian is a type 8. He wants to do things. He wants to show how great he is. Most of the adventures of the Conan the Barbarian stories were him just doing heroic stuff. He didn't really have a motivation beyond that. Maybe get some rewards, but he kind of like in one of the first. It's thought of as like one of Conan's earliest adventures was the Tower of the Elephant, and basically the whole premise was is he just wanted to climb up into the tower to see what's in it because people told him that he couldn't, and he was stupid for even talking about it. That's very much type 8. And then another one I've been reading him lately is Mike Hammer from the Mickey Spillane stories, and he's very much a type 8. He does things. He's not interested in following the rules. That's why he's a private eye instead of a cop, because he can break the rules that way and kind of skate by. Definitely wants to go after and get the get the bad guys. I don't think he could be a type 1, I suppose, in the sense that he is seeking out justice, kind of like a Batman type character. But at least when I read him, he seems more like a type 8 because he seems to be much more. It's not as much motivated by justice because even a lot of his things that he goes after, it's more personal as opposed to he's just fighting crime to fight crime. It's more someone has killed his friend. His friend is dead. Someone killed a woman that he's interested in. His motivations for fighting crime is much more personal, and so that's why I'd see him more as a type 8. But anyway, I hope you found this interesting. I have a link in the below of all my books, also my website. If you sign up for my website, you'll get one of the free stories from Yark the Scholar, who's kind of like my hero that I've been writing. And there's also a link to the free ebook of all these short stories by Yark the Scholar, and kind of, see some mystery and in a fantasy setting type. But anyway, I will talk to you next week. Bye.